Good morning, fellow St. Markers and guests. I was inspired to deliver a living epistle while listening to the one delivered by Elizabeth Runquist this past All Saints' Day. Her rich remembrances of all the things that St. Mark's has meant to her and how deeply it has been woven into her life, especially her life with Dave, resonated with me. I was even further inspired by Father Jim Wernicke's sermon that day, which centered on two ideas. First, that the dead are always with us, and second, that we are all saints in that God has sanctified each of us. But let me pause here for a quick apology to Father Jim, because it is likely that he actually delivered a far more complex and nuanced message. But unfortunately, I am not the most complex and nuanced learner. And for better or for worse, that was the message that I took in. But back to what inspired me about these two talks was that they also set me off to thinking about my own complicated relationship with the church and why St. Mark's means so much to me. To be clear, I do not mean that I have a complicated relationship with God or with St. Mark's, but I do have a complicated relationship with the church, with a big C, meaning the political organized church with its hierarchies and its rules. The Big C church played a relatively large role in my life growing up, and it was not an especially happy relationship. Both my father and my maternal grandfather were ordained ministers, and if they chose, each could share tales of woe regarding their chosen professions, as could their wives and their children. Nevertheless, despite my parents' experience with the pitfalls of organized religion, they were determined to pursue a life of Christian service. They spent 10 years in India teaching at a small mission college run by the United Church of Canada before ultimately returning to New York and pursuing lay careers. So I grew up in a family atmosphere that stressed active service over spoken faith. And I grew up understanding that deeds were more important than words, and that faith cannot exist without doubt. And in the time-honored tradition of adolescence, I soon sniffed out the self-serving hypocrisy that permeates so much of the Big C church. Like many others in the baby boom generation, I stopped attending church in my teens. But I never lost my faith in God or my interest in religion. Instead, my faith deepened into an understanding that there are many paths that lead to God, and they are all true. For me, the preferred path is the one I walked as a child, and the one that ultimately brought me and Mark and our children here, where we found a welcoming community that lives out what I believe to be the core principles of Christian faith. Unlike my feelings about the Big C church, my love for St. Mark's is entirely uncomplicated. But back to what inspired me back on November 1st, on All Saints' Day, to want to give a living epistle about St. Mark's. In part, it was hearing the echoes of my own history in Elizabeth's reminiscences, which reminded me how grateful I am that my children still consider St. Mark's to be their church family, and that Mark's ashes are buried just outside these walls, and that his little free library is enjoyed every day by people he never knew. Indeed, as Father Jim reminded us that day earlier this month, the dead are always with us, and God is always within us, and we are all saints in that we are all sanctified to do God's work. As Pastor John said during that same service, it takes a congregation to make a church. I'm not sure if she meant it this way, but I take it to mean a little C church, like St. Mark's, rather than the Big C political church that we operate under and sometimes chafe at. We all come to little C St. Mark's with our own diverse histories and struggles, but we come together not only for solace and healing, but also for strength and inspiration to build for the future. During this particular season of stewardship, so ably led by Jackie McLeod and other members of the stewardship committee, I've been reflecting on the notion that regardless of my complicated feelings about the Big C church, I need to continue to invest in St. Mark's, with a monetary pledge, of course, but also to invest my mind and my heart so this congregation can continue to thrive and nourish others as it has me for many decades into the future. To Elizabeth and Jim and Joan and the whole congregation, thank you for reminding me about what I need to invest in and why. And thanks be to God for all my gifts, but especially for the gift of St. Mark's.